You're listening to the Business for Creatives podcast, where each week we uncover the secrets to balancing creativity and business, all in the one place with your host, me, Den Lennie. Welcome to this episode of the Business for Creatives podcast, the show where we discover and explore the relationship between business and creativity. This week, I am extremely excited and very privileged to have a very dear friend, someone I've known for a couple of years now, on to talk about something which I think is fundamental to success in both creativity and business. I'm here with Prue Sturgeon. Now, before we get Prue on to tell us more about her incredible work, Prue is a mind-body medicine practitioner. She's a kinesiologist and a spiral practitioner. More on that in just a moment. Prue helps busy entrepreneurs who are stressed out and overwhelmed transform their relationship to their health and their life, so they can experience clarity around their inner purpose, alignment in their business, improved communication in relationships, and be fully expressed in who they are. Prue, it's my absolute pleasure to have you on board. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thanks, Dan. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you.
So, look, this is an area of my life that I have been working on for about 18 months now, and about a year working closely with you. And I wanted to come on the show because this really ties into so many levels, but primarily mindset and limiting beliefs. Now, before we get into all of that, just tell us a bit about your background. How did you come to do this? And just explain a little bit about the journey as how you got here.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So, yeah, I'm a practitioner now. I haven't always been, obviously. My previous career was actually in production management and freelance producing. So I was doing that for almost 5 years. And what I began to realize, I was in my early 20s at the time, and what I began to realize was that there was a lot that I loved about the work, and there was also some deeper things that I didn't feel fully resonated with me. In the environment that I was working at the time, I looked around and I could see that there were people that were really quite stressed around me and not necessarily fully enjoying their job and their role in their life. And I could sense and feel deeper inside that 5 or 10 years down the track, that most probably would be me if I stayed there. So I took the leap, I made the jump, and what actually initiated that was I was beginning to practice yoga quite a lot. And what I began to realize through practicing yoga was that there was this whole other side, this whole other experience of life that I hadn't really been that exposed to, and that was this real experience of being in my body, this feeling of energy moving through my body. I remember a few classes when I first started where the teacher would say, "We're going to be opening our hips today, so there might be some emotion that comes up." And I was like, "What, really?" And then I remember crying on the mat going, "Where did that even come from? Like, I don't even know what I'm crying about." So it was kind of through this process of beginning to really connect with my body and really feel this energy inside of me. And I began to become really curious about this. I began to talk to the yoga teachers. I began to explore acupuncture. I began to explore a number of other therapies. I've always been quite curious about how the body works and what's going on and how we process things. So that kind of led me to explore lots of different therapies. I stopped working in the production industry. I followed a few different avenues and explored a few different therapies. And it ended up with me coming to explore kinesiology, which really helped me through a time in my life, a breakup of a relationship. And some things came up that I didn't even know were going on, but they were spot on. And it really made me so fascinated by how the body holds onto emotion, by how the body retains this information unless it's processed at a subconscious level. And so I began to study it. I began to explore these different avenues, and that's what led me to what I do now.
So we actually, Charlie and I talked about kinesiology in episode 1 of the podcast, and I was very open about the fact that I can't actually describe what kinesiology is, despite the fact I've been having kinesiology for the last 12 months. And I said, at one point we'll get Prue on the show and she can explain so I explain it as it's kind of like traditional Chinese medicine that involves acupressure points and psychology and then I stopped. So can you attempt to explain to the listeners and the viewers because it's the most common question I get is what's kinesiology?
Absolutely. Yeah, I get that question a lot too. So essentially, kinesiology is a biofeedback tool, and it's the ability to tap into the body. So the body is essentially our subconscious mind, and it's our ability to tap into that and to ask the body what's actually relevant or what's actually a priority to move forward with. So lots of different practitioners use it, chiropractors, naturopaths. They might test, if it's something structural going on, if there's a certain supplement that's needed. So there's lots of different practitioners that can use this. So for me, personally, in the way that I practice, I use kinesiology with the body, and we can actually check if there's a particular emotion that's present. We can look at if there's a particular age at which that happened. We can look at if there's a meridian. So in traditional Chinese medicine, there are energetic channels that run through the body. And so we can actually look at what's actually needed in order for this emotion to be acknowledged, or this story or this pain in the body, and how is it best, what's the priority for it to actually be processed through the body and cleared and let go.
It's something which, having been experiencing this with you for the last year, I totally understand now. For anyone who's never had kinesiology, it is the most, if you're willing to commit to being open to it, it is something that, Prue will be working on me and she'll go, this has come up. And I'm like, holy shit, how is that even possible that you can tell this word here is coming from touching my shoulder? But what I can say for anyone who's not had it is that the difference between my journey from 12 months ago to now, I am literally, we joke, I'm Den 2.0. There's old little Den who's carried all this stuff around since childhood, and there's now Den 2.0. And the best way to describe it is it's like I'm in a cocoon and the chrysalis is breaking and a new version of me is coming out. And I think the thing that's been so interesting is the process of the journey. And it's like, the warning I would give to anyone, but it's a friendly warning, is when you go into the Pandora's box of your inner self, there's no turning back. Yet the benefits and the discoveries you make on the other side, and it's an ongoing process. It's a bit like peeling an onion, unpeeling an onion. You start with the outer shell of the big stuff, and then you get unpeeling and unpeeling and unpeeling. How did you discover this process, and what drives you to continue to do it?
Good questions. I do actually want to make a comment on what you were talking about in terms of the inner self. So a lot of the processes that I use, I'm going to start with, most of us, and probably most of the people who are listening or watching this podcast, have grown up in Western society, and essentially we're not necessarily, unless you've had, that like that role modeling from a young age of, there is an internal part of us and there is a space where we can get to know what's actually going on inside. But generally in the Western world, we're pretty much taught that, it's about doing, it's about this outward focus, it's about productivity and what's happening out here. So I find that with a lot of people that I work with, myself included, in my own journey, there's this whole terrain that hasn't yet been navigated, and that's this internal part of ourselves. Like so many people at the moment, there's this massive movement of what's actually going on inside, and who are we really at our core, at our essence? Who are we truly? So, and I think this informs so much of who we are in our relationships and who we are in our business. So coming back to your question about what drives me to do this, it's like I would be spending my time doing this anyway. Like if I had a different day job, I would be reading about this. I would be going to see practitioners. I would be exploring this myself anyway. So why not make it my role and a way that I can actually help and assist others in navigating this space too. I did study at a college, so I learned the fundamentals, a lot about traditional Chinese medicine philosophy, which I really like because that really looks at who we are as a whole. So we're not breaking things necessarily down into a symptom in one part of the body or one emotion that's coming up. It's really looking at, okay, what's going on the whole and what's actually the pattern here? What's the cause? What's underlying these things that keep occurring? Because traditional Chinese medicine is so, and a lot of other traditional medicine philosophies as well, are so good at looking at the whole picture because we are part of a whole. We're not just a hand or a foot or our knee that has an issue. It's like what's actually going on inside as well, because we experience our world based on how we feel most of the time.
It's interesting, I just kind of can't help but draw on the experiences I've had in the last 12 or so months. And the biggest shift for me when I first came to see you, and I'd explored some other, therapies and modalities, massage, yoga, that kind of thing. And I'd been meditating. So I'd learned some of the basic principles of breathing and slowing down and internalizing. But the thing for me was everything was in my head and I was processing all this data in my head and I was trying to figure out answers. And what's happened is that process has dropped down into my heart. And I now intrinsically feel the right path. Now, for some people listening to this who are perhaps cynical or perhaps think this is woo-woo, and you know what, that's okay. One of the things I've learned in the last 12 months is everyone's entitled and open to have their own opinion, and that's completely great. I'm not here to convince anyone of anything, but I do feel like the world is becoming a more conscious place. And in Tim Ferriss's book, Tribe of Mentors, virtually every single successful entrepreneur touched on this subject of moving into your heart, meditation. Do you feel like the world is gently moving towards, maybe even not that gently, towards being more aware?
Absolutely. And I'm seeing it everywhere, and it sounds as though you are as well. It's really coming out in entrepreneurship, I think, because if people are going to start a business or start devoting their life and their time and their energy to something, why not make it something that you actually enjoy doing? In order to find out what you enjoy doing, you actually need to do a little bit of investigation and go, oh, this is an area that I really like to talk about, or this is an area that I like to work in. This is the equipment that I like to use, or whatever your thing is. So in order to do that, there has to be some sort of internal questioning about, okay, is this where I'm going to go and how I'm going to spend my time? So I definitely am seeing a shift in that way for sure. And similar to what I was saying before, in the Western world, we've been raised to have this real focus on what we're doing, what we're producing, this outward focus. And, I call myself a mind-body medicine practitioner because it's really about this integration between the mind and the body. And I loved how you said that. And we've talked about this in your sessions as well, where there's this real dropping down here into your body to feel and be present. Because whenever we're up here, 99% of the time, it's actually quite either future focused or past focused. And what that means is it's made up because there's a million different perceptions of what that past thing was and how it happened and what that future thing could be and how it might happen. So that's all well and good. And, it's almost like our brains have been trained to this advanced level where they're like running on their own and they're like 500 steps ahead of the body. And the body's just back here going like, I just need some rest, or I just need some water, So whenever we can actually become really present in our body, we're going to calm the nervous system. We're going to feel our body here in this moment and present now. And we're actually going to be able to tune in, as you so rightly said, like this internal space, whether it's intuition, whether it's your internal guidance, your heart, whatever that thing is for you. But there is a deep, calm presence to it. And it can really begin, you can actually work them both together, but it's about being curious enough and observant enough and courageous enough to actually stop and be still. Like, this is not a journey for the faint-hearted. As you said, like, it's been a year of deep dives. Like, you've really gone there, and you've really opened up, and you've really been vulnerable, and I think you're really reaping the rewards from that. Like you're shining, and you're expressing yourself. And I see a lot of my clients doing this, and it's a really beautiful, beautiful process. But it takes courage, because it's so easy to stay up here and just keep going. But that always leads to burnout. We see it everywhere in our society.
I feel that, especially creative people who fundamentally are creative first, who are then running a business, there's already a massive rub, a massive friction between creativity and commerce, because commerce is logical. It's numbers, it's statistics, it's sales, it's conversions, it's money in the bank, it's cash flow. Creativity is the complete opposite. It's ethereal, it's thinking, it's feeling. And I feel that for creatives listening to this podcast, that is a common challenge. So actually, if you're creatively inclined, this should be something that's relatively easy to step into. But what I would say is actually it can be, and it can also be a big challenge, because you have to start being really honest with yourself. And actually, the voice. I was listening to this podcast the other day, an amazing podcast that the Confessions of a Business Owner. And Charlie was talking to Anna. Dana's a community manager, and she was talking about how that voice in your head. She said, "I'd love to listen to someone else's voice in their head, because my one is a complete bastard. Like, it is just like, you're useless, you're going to fail, it's never going to work, people are laughing at you." And yet others are seeing this shining light. And that's something that I think, particularly as creatives, we are really, really hard on ourselves. How can a process of opening up through treatments, treatments is the wrong word, because they're sessions. I see this as important as any business coaching that I might do. How would you encourage someone who is perhaps struggling with overwhelm and stress? What would you encourage them to do first in terms of trying to edge towards being in a position where they might be open to taking on something like this?
That's a really good question. Look, I can totally resonate with the internal dialogue, the negative self-talk. We've all been there, myself included. And I think it's about really educating yourself and becoming aware that when we get to a state where we're actually hearing all of this negative internal dialogue, we've actually gotten to a point where old subconscious patterns are actually running us. So this is like old things from the past. And what I would recommend is, it takes courage, but something easy that you can do is actually just to sit and be still. And as easy as that may sound, it is not. For many, many people, myself included at not so long ago, but to be able to sit there and just be still, it actually takes courage, because you have to sit and be with that part of yourself that we're often not willing to listen to. We want to avoid, we want to go and do other things. So that would be something easy you can do for sure. And I would say, just make a note of what you're actually hearing, and notice whose voice maybe that sounds like. If this is old subconscious programs that are running, maybe from childhood, maybe from 5 years ago, maybe an old boss, it actually doesn't really matter who it is, but knowing that it's all happening in here, right?
And just for those listening, Prue is pointing to her head.
My head, yes. It's all happening in here, and we actually have, what we can control is what's actually going on in here. If there's an emotion coming up, we have a choice whether we look at it or not. If there's these constant internal dialogues that are happening, we have a choice whether we're going to jump on board with them and believe them to be true, avoid them, or actually go, hey, wait a minute, does this actually make sense? Is there evidence for this? And if there is there evidence for the opposite? Because we're human beings and we're complex, and we have the ability to feel the whole gamut of emotions. We have the ability to be every archetype. And what I mean by archetypes is, we have an inner child. We have that adult figure. We have a more masculine side. We have a more feminine side, regardless of your gender, regardless of your inclination. It doesn't matter. But when we're actually rejecting parts of ourselves, so whether that's, the inner child that just wants to sometimes chill out and have fun and go and run and play out in nature, or we're avoiding, the structure and that real adult part of our life where we need to get shit done, essentially. Whatever we're rejecting and pushing away, it's going to come out in other areas of our life. So the more that we can get real, and as you said so beautifully, Den, get really honest with ourselves about what isn't working, what keeps showing up, what are the patterns that I'm actually noticing here, where do I sabotage myself? Because they're really going to be your kind of shining lights on your journey inward. And I would also say, finding someone to actually help you on that process is really good. I have people that help me. I go and have sessions all the time, and it just really helps for you to see things that are in your blind spots.
I say this time and time again, and with my clients, you cannot succeed on your own. It's impossible. Nobody has ever succeeded in a commercial enterprise solo. Never. Great athletes have coaches, actors have coaches, singers have coaches. And what I'm really fascinated by and what I really love is the fact that we as a universe are becoming more conscious of the fact that, look, we are made up of atoms and cells. And if you are pissed off with something, let's say a client's come along, messed you around, they've really wound you up, you feel like you've given your all to that client. And particularly for creatives, we always go over and above, we always over deliver. Then the client comes back and questions one thing, and you feel like they haven't noticed all the great work I've done, they've noticed this one negative thing. And we can carry that around for months and years. And because our cells literally hang on to that energy. And that's the thing that I've found just so fascinating about this process. So something you talked about in the past in our sessions was this idea of yin and yang, and the fact that there's a masculine and feminine, but it doesn't actually relate to your sexuality or your sex. It's like, can you explain more about what that is in terms of positive and minus, positive and negative energy or opposites?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an ancient Chinese concept where we're actually looking at equal opposites. So the universe wouldn't exist if we didn't have equal opposites to provide the resistance that's needed for us to be here, essentially, and for the universe, for the world to be what it is. So what I mean by equal opposites is you can't have up without down, you can't have black without white, you can't have hot without cold. And so it's this real understanding that in order to have this, we actually need to have its opposite to have something to compare it to. So human body is the same. We are constantly in a state of homeostasis where the body's trying to always keep this really finite balance. Like it's actually not very much the body can move by, whether that's in, temperature, your different levels in your blood and hormones and all that sort of thing. So it's the same when it comes to how we are in the external world and how we are in the internal world. So what I mean by yin and yang is yang, I want you to think of yang as if it's represented by daytime, sunlight, heat, movement, doing, and this outward focus. And it's termed more masculine, but that doesn't mean more masculine gender. It's actually just a more masculine structural approach. Yin is actually represented by cool, calm, nighttime, more feminine, and a much more inward focus. So if you kind of think about yourself in your day-to-day life in a Western world, how much of the ratio is more of a yang focus, so more of an outward focus, external focus, and how much is more of an internal focus? And it's just interesting to do that with yourself. If you're listening to this, it might be interesting to have a look at your life and see how that ratio looks for you. Because ultimately, if we have so much of a focus externally, then we're actually not balancing it properly. And there's going to be ways that your life or your body will start to compensate for that. So that can come out sometimes in, sleep problems, anxiety, depression, things coming up in your body, a lot of like pain, because a lot of the time is spent up here and it's actually not being present in the body and knowing what's going on in here. How am I actually feeling about this?
I think also, and I'm going to be quite open about this, I used to drink too much. Being television, we were always drinking, other stuff was going on. And it's almost like you mask the issues you don't want to deal with, you mask by going out and drinking and having partying or whatever. Is that something you experience? Like that there's people who, I'm not judging anyone, but if you're someone who likes to go out and party and drink and kind of get over the week, actually all you're doing is masking the deeper challenges. And that can compound until people have meltdowns.
Absolutely. But that can also show up, Dan, and I want to preface this by saying, like, we're all human, right? Like, we all love to go out every so often, have fun, let loose, and it's totally fine. Everything is exactly as it's meant to be. And there can also be excessive behavior that happens because sometimes we don't actually know how to deal with the feelings that are there. We don't even know that there are feelings that are there. We just know that it's uncomfortable to be on our own, or maybe it's uncomfortable to not have any plans, have a whole weekend free, and then we're like, oh, what am I meant to do with this time? You might find that there's some social anxiety, but the excessive behavior can come out in, social media scrolling, or constantly having to watch television, or shopping, or eating, or drinking, or whatever that is. So it's really noticing, and that's why I recommended, even just sitting for 5 or 10 minutes and being in stillness and just noticing if that is uncomfortable for you and how uncomfortable that is for you and what actually comes up during that time. Because ultimately, more than likely you're an adult if you're listening to this, and as an adult you've had plenty of experience, and you know that we're all sovereign beings. Like, we can actually sit. If you needed to sit there, if someone had a gun to your head and you needed to sit there for 10 minutes and be still, you would do it. So being able to do that for yourself and just notice and observe what's going on inside is an incredible skill to develop.
So let's just let's twist this up a little bit. So let's go back 10 years. What would Prue 2018 tell Prue 2008 if you had to give yourself one piece of guidance?
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's a good one. I would recommend to 10-year younger Prue to really begin to develop and trust that internal voice. Like, I didn't really, looking back now, I had a lot of connection to it. I just didn't really trust it. I trusted other people's opinions more than I trusted my own internal guidance. So, I would really recommend that she gets a journal, starts writing, and begins to follow the guidance that is actually there within. And it's within all of us. I hear it so often in sessions, like, oh, I don't know what to do, but this, and this came up, and it's like you already have the answer inside of you. Actually, it's about giving yourself permission and being able to trust it.
I love that. Now, this podcast is called Business for Creatives, and everything we're talking about is incredible. But, you do run a business, and how do you, it's different for everyone. How do you process the commercial side of what you do? And I'm asking this at a very opportune time, because you just recently announced a price increase and a shortening of the sessions. Now, I am pretty certain that that's something that you worked on inside for quite some time. So, and I think that a lot of people listening to this struggle with putting up the prices, understanding their true value, and being recompensed commercially in a transactional way for the value they bring. Talk to me a bit about your journey around commercializing what you do.
Yeah, well, it's definitely been a journey. That's been one of the things that I've definitely been working on myself. As you know, I've shared bits about that with you. Look, to be honest, as I mentioned, I changed careers and began to do this because it's really something that's so close to my heart, that it's something that I want to do with my time and however that happened was however it was going to happen. So commercializing it was definitely the biggest learning area for me. And I'm sorry, I forgot what your question
Well, I mean, I guess the question is, how did you find the courage to increase your prices?
Good one. Okay. Well, I found the courage to increase my prices recently. It was a result of a process that I went through that was super, super, super powerful. And it actually really became obvious to me that I wasn't actually valuing my time and what I was actually providing, the service I was providing, at a high enough level. Like, I've seen so much transformation happen in my sessions, and particularly when I have people who are committed to a certain amount of time, yourself included. Like, watching all of my clients just bloom and thrive through that process has been amazing. So I think, being a few years into practicing now, it was really time to go, okay, right, like, let's tighten this ship up a little bit. So having recently gone through this process myself, and that's actually called S.C.A.L.E, it just became really obvious to me, like, it didn't actually feel right anymore. It didn't feel in alignment to be offering something at that level, at that price, for that amount of time. It just didn't resonate with me anymore. So it was like up-leveling, really, and it felt right and it resonated.
And let me ask you this, because I think, I know, I will bank $1,000 on this, that if I ask any creative listening to this, when was the last time you put your prices up and how did it feel? They'll all come up with the same answer. Not for a while, and when I did it was very, very uncomfortable. Let me ask you this: of all your current clients that you've now explained that you're increasing your prices and lowering the session time by 15 minutes, how many have responded negatively?
None. They've all said, okay, great, I'll book in next week. Like, yes.
And I think but that's such a valuable lesson, Prue, because
it is.
We all undervalue ourselves. We almost are all underselling our value. And it's something that we're constantly working on. But the fact is, if you are delivering incredible value to your clients, you could practically double your prices. And yes, you might lose some. And maybe doubling is extreme, but maybe not, And maybe it comes down to how you package your value. Because at the moment, many creators still sell their time for money. It's like 90 minutes for X amount of dollars. And it'd be interesting to explore this with you further about, re-looking at how you in fact present your offering as a value-based offer, not simply a time for money. And that'll be an interesting topic, perhaps for another session.
Yes, that's a work in progress at the moment, but it's definitely something that I'm looking at. And I really think that anything like this, when we're, especially, as an entrepreneur myself, running my own business, and you as well, like, so much of how we feel about what we offer comes down to how worthy we feel of receiving. How worthy we feel of being in that, like, driving that ship, and you've got your clients in the back, and you feel worthy of, like, I've got this, I'm receiving what I need in order to keep this ship moving forward. So I think a lot of it comes down to, like, that self-value, self-worth, and, like, a self-confidence in what we're actually here and how we're contributing, what we're here to do and how we're contributing.
And I think also everything kind of happens at the right time. One thing I've certainly learned in my years is that there is actually no rush. If you actually slow down and take some more time, everything you could possibly need is within you. It's 100% inside you. And if you just slow down a little bit, because I spent 3-4 years working 60, 80, 100 hours a week, just pounding to get sales in, do jobs, and I was making money, but there was nothing left for me. I work much less now. I'm far more efficient and far more effective because I just take a bit of time. And that could simply be walking 15 minutes to get to a location and just appreciating nature. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So listen, quick fire questions. What's the best advice you've ever received?
I loved this line. I actually must have been about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was, You can be the juiciest, ripest peach, and there's still going to be people who don't like peaches. I don't actually know who said it, but I loved it because
I like that a lot.
Because it's so true. Like, not everyone's going to dig what you've got to offer, and that's okay. Like, you're not going to dig everything that everyone else is offering.
That's amazing. And now, can you share one of your personal habits that you strongly believe contributes to your success and your fulfillment?
Yeah, sure. So one of my habits is that I basically don't have any notifications on my phone and email and whatever. I have dedicated time that I go and check those things so that my space is my time, my devices don't interrupt me. I check it when it suits me, and I think it makes me much more effective with my time.
I love that. I am getting very close to that. In fact, this morning decided I was going to take Messenger off my phone because when I get up, the first thing I do is check it. And if I see a message from a client, I then start thinking about that at 7 o'clock in the morning. And that's not healthy for me because I can deal with it at 10 o'clock when I get to work. What's the must-read book in your view? What's one book, if you can find or choose one, that you think might have the greatest impact on someone listening to this?
Yeah, I would love to recommend Joe Dispenza's Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And this really explores how we get into habits, we get into patterns, and we basically end up living this predictable life because we're doing the same things over and over again. And so the brain the brain wires in the same way. And so we find ourselves having the same conversations or having the same patterns happen in relationships as well, or in business. And so what he really looks at is how we can really identify what isn't serving in order to create essentially a future that we're really excited about, that's unknown, that is surprising for us and keeps us really excited about life.
Now, is this the Dr. Joe Dispenza, who also has a book, which I was reading recently, which I just named, about intuition and the fact that as a medical doctor, he has been backing up for want of a better word, the woo-woo that we would traditionally call it, with science. Now,
absolutely, yes.
What's that book? There's a book, is it Intuition?
Becoming Supernatural?
Becoming Supernatural, another incredible book. So can you describe a bit about that book? Because that's something that I started reading and still am reading it, but it's blowing my mind.
Yeah, I haven't actually finished Becoming Supernatural, but from my understanding, it's about he does meditation or workshop weekends, and he has done for the last few years, where he takes the biomarkers at the beginning and at the end to understand what's actually going on for all of the participants. So their blood work, all of the biofeedback. And then he's actually collating it all and finding how people have actually been able to shift some incredible conditions as a result of doing this mindfulness and meditation programs and processes that he recommends. It's really incredible. And he's a neuroscientist. Like, he started out as a chiropractor, started to notice all of these things that were happening as a result of what he was doing with his clients, and the body was healing itself essentially. And then he became interested in the neuroscience and the psychoimmunology, which is about how our body responds to our mind. And yeah, he's created these experiences as a result.
Amazing. I 100% in complete alignment with the fact that stress will kill you. And more than bad food, bad diet, no exercise, stress, and a lack of connection with any human. So community, going to the coffee shop, meeting someone in the street, saying good day. The simplest advice I ever got was just to learn to breathe and meditate. And it's so simple, but as you said, it's not easy to necessarily calm yourself down. But it is what I would say to anyone who's perhaps a little bit skeptical about this, is that I was the guy working 100 hours a week. Didn't think, I literally said to my wife, who's a natural therapist, I joked one day and said, as soon as you get crystals in the bedroom, that's it, we're done. And I'm like eating my words today, because I now am more in tune with the energy that on a molecular level that different compounds can have an impact on us. And it's like anything, when you start to open up to it and listen and experience, it is quite dramatic, the impact it can have on your life and business. And my business and life is, it's just improving. It's version 2.0. All the things that I know are still there, but I'm learning to filter much better. And as a result, this podcast is happening. This podcast would never have happened with old Den. So I'm completely and utterly convinced by this, and I'm grateful that we get to work together. But I'm so glad you're on the podcast. So if you had one piece of advice to share with the listeners and viewers, what would it be?
I would say to get curious. To get curious if you're noticing any of this negative internal dialogue or the patterns, self-sabotage, anything like that. Like, you're creatives and you're entrepreneurs more than likely. So get curious and begin to notice this, like observe it, note it down, go and talk to someone, contact someone, actually explore this, because it's here for a reason, and it can either be your biggest downfall or it can actually be something that helps you along your journey. You can use it, you can learn from it. So yeah, I'd say get curious and observe what's going on inside.
I love that. Prue, how can people learn more about you and what you do?
Very good question. Thank you. They can visit my website, pruesturgeon.com. And I am also a practitioner at HealthSpace in Sydney. So if they wanted to look at my bio, you can look at healthspaceclinics.com.au and check out the King's Cross team for more information on what I do.
And we'll link to that beneath this podcast as well. Prue, it's really such a significant journey I've been on personally, and that's why I wanted you to come on this, because in an hour we can't really go too deep, but I just hope that those people listening and watching this are inspired to just look at the next step. I'm so grateful that you've joined us today. You are a beautiful human being. I love you with all my heart, and thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Dan, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you over the last year, to see you flourish and grow into Den 2.0, which has just been the most beautiful thing to watch. And thank you to all of the listeners. I think it's a great new terrain to navigate this internal space. So thank you for having me, Dan.
You've been listening to the Business for Creatives podcast with your host, me, Den Lennie. If you're a creative business owner who is struggling to get your business performing at the level you want, then head on over to businessforcreativespodcast.com to take a free business evaluation survey and discover where you can plug the holes in your business. You can also access a range of free training to help you build your business faster. Also, don't forget to rate the show over on iTunes so we can get the message out there to more creatives who need to hear it. Thanks for listening.